Hey guys, before we get into the episode, I just wanted to take a second to talk to you about 12 Strides and 12 Group Norms for Liberty and Recovery. This is a book by former guest of the show, Asher Azzo. And what it is a deep dive into libertarianism and 12-step philosophy. Not only do you get to learn about how to apply those principles to your very own life, but you also get to see what it looked like for the recovery community going through lockdowns and the COVID hysteria. Also included at the end of the book is a fictional story about a man in recovery searching for his own son. You can find this book on Amazon, paperback, or it's also available on Kindle. I will include the link to the book in the show notes page for this episode, so please go check it out. What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Clean Libertarian Podcast. Thank you so much for hanging with me. Sorry I took a month off. Listen, I needed that time off, right? We geared up. We went to the national convention out there in Reno. Guys, it was so cool, man. We got to spread the good word of the Sober Caucus. And from the floor convention, we were actually able to raise $353 for a local fellowship hall out there. So not only did we show up in Reno, but we left it in a little bit of a better condition than we found it in. And that's always a plus. You can't go wrong with that. So, good things on the horizon, man. There is a lot going on. The Sober Caucus really got their name out there. We've got more members stepping up. LP National really, they got a change in leadership. And I know that a lot of people are hesitant. I'm one of them. I'm not a Mises Caucus guy. But I will tell you that so far, from what I've seen, I think we're going to start getting some more attention than what we have seen in recent years. So I'm not gonna hold anybody to the fire over something that hasn't happened yet. So give these folks a chance, man. Let them do what they're going to do. And so anyway, I hope over the last month you guys have been doing well. Thank you so much, like I said, for hanging in there with me. And what a way to kick off the triumphant return than with Ben Westhoff. Ben is an investigative journalist. He is the author of the book Fentanyl Inc., where he does a deep dive into the origins of fentanyl, how it's gotten into our supply, how it is just predominantly taken over, and this is just an illuminating conversation that we had. And so I'm not gonna hang out too much in this intro. You guys enjoy. Here is Ben Westhoff. All right, I am here with Ben Westhoff. Ben, thank you so much for joining me. How you doing, sir?
Great, Drew. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, man, this is I heard you on Rogan. I got to read. I haven't read all the way through Fentanyl Inc. yet, but I went to Reno a couple of weeks ago, and on the flight there and on the flight back, I was able to really get in through a lot of it. And so this is one of those conversations that absolutely is important to have. Now, you're an investigative journalist. This is kind of like this is what you do. I really wanted to start out with just asking, like, how did you get into this? Like, what has driven you to pursue this?
I came up as actually a music journalist, and I was working as the music editor in LA Weekly. I wrote a lot about hip hop. I wrote 2 books about hip hop, and I was investigating the rave scene in LA, where people were kind of dropping like flies. And it seems like every time there was a big rave, someone would die, or 2 people or 3 people. And so the deaths were always blamed on ecstasy. And so this seemed weird to me because, ecstasy I knew doesn't really kill a lot of people. And so I kind of did a deep dive into what these chemicals were that were actually killing people. And it turns out that these so-called ecstasy pills had like no MDMA at all, or very little. And it turned out there were all these new chemicals called NPS, novel psychoactive substances, that were being cut into these pills, and they were all being made in China, and most people had never heard of any of them. So I started investigating that, and that's when I learned about fentanyl, which sort of took over the whole book at that point.
Yeah, that's a great progression right there. Because I remember it kind of starting back in the day too. You know, like I remember whenever I was younger, like Dance Safe was a thing, and there's still a thing, obviously, but I remember going to the website and checking the pills to make sure, that your print was on there, that you could find out what's in your pills and tabs and whatnot.
Oh, so
But
you would just like look at your pill and just visually compare to what they had. Yeah, that was another era. That's really that's cool.
yeah, that's way back when, man. That's hell, that's been what, 20 years ago, I think now. Yeah, because I was in my no, maybe not 20, but yeah, that's here in Oklahoma, man. We didn't have anything really in the way of like popular nonprofits that were doing any type of like harm reduction type of stuff. Like if you're buying these substances, it is heavily on the DL. Uh,
Yeah, I mean,
you know,
now it's like they can make fake pills that look just like the real ones. So that method is probably not
not
as
yeah.
trustworthy. Now people send pills in, they have their home testing kits, but yeah, back in the day, that was a really effective way to check what you had.
So let me ask you, when you got into this and when you saw it, like what has been the biggest thing for you, the biggest eye opener as far as this fentanyl epidemic?
Well, it's just something that nobody saw coming at all, including the DEA. I found these DEA threat assessment reports from like 2015, 2016. And basically, they said, fentanyl, it's bad, but people aren't going to want to take it recreationally because the risk of death is too high. So don't worry about it. That's basically what they were saying. And then by 2016, their report came out probably at the beginning of 2016. And by the end of 2016, it was already the deadliest drug, ever in America on in terms of annual number of people killed. And it's only gotten worse and worse since then. And yet still the public consciousness about it is very low, and I attribute that to kind of like opioid fatigue. This is the third wave of the opioid epidemic. The pills like Oxycontin were the first wave, and that was big news, and that's still big news. In a way, it's like still what people are talking about. There's been the second wave heroin, and now the third wave is fentanyl, but people are still obsessed with like the Sacklers and OxyContin, and that's not the problem at all anymore. And people, I think, just got tired of reading about it. You know what I mean? There's so many deaths. It's such a depressing story that people were like, well, if you thought that was bad, now fentanyl is really bad, and people are like, all right, enough. But it just doesn't take seriously how not only deadly it is, but just how pervasive it is and how it can be cut into all these other drugs that people don't even realize.
Yeah, I think one of the for me, like, and when I read, what was stood out to me the most was talking about like people walking around like you could walk around with a Ziploc baggie full of fentanyl and the cops couldn't touch you, because it was just a slight difference off. And I've seen some narcotics kind of take that trajectory. Like I remember like 2CE and 2CI, when once that hit the streets out here, like cops couldn't do anything to you, but like you had it, and none of us using, consumers, none of us really knew what the hell it was. That's kind of the thing. And so it's the scary thing about like how we figure out what something is you get the crash test dummy in the group to try it out, and if they have a good time, then we're all having a good time. you know
Right. I
um,
read a lot about Sasha Shulgin, he's called the godfather of ecstasy, but really he's kind of the godfather of NPS and these new synthetic drugs. So basically, an NPS is just a drug you've never heard of before, or most people had never heard of until recently. Like you said, all the 2CI, 2CB, they're different. There's psychedelics, there's opioids, there's cannabinoids, um, cathinones, all these different classes of drugs that, for almost all of human history, there was like a dozen, drugs that people used reliably to get high, and they came from plants and animals sometimes. And but now in the last 10 years or so, there's like 100 new drugs a year every year, or sometimes even a lot more than that. And Sasha Shulgin kind of pioneered this idea of just subtly adjusting the molecules of a known drug, switching the chemical formula just a little bit, and then you have something new. And he, of course, sampled these himself to see what he had. And that technique has kind of gotten really popular on the internet.
So, as it stands right now, yeah, I mean, it's how long could we see these type of adjustments being made with this same kind of derivative of
I mean, it's
fentanyl?
endless. It's literally, infinite number of possible drugs. I mean, that said, most of these new chemicals, they don't come from scratch. Almost everything is sort of a derivative of something that's already out there. And the internet really opened all this up, because there are all these university papers from decades in past, the 90s, 80s, 70s, where university chemists were trying to patent a chemical or bring a chemical to market, with some sort of medical purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times they just didn't make it, and these chemicals were never sold or marketed. But they remain in these academic papers that were just sitting on dusty university shelves for so many years. But in the internet age, they're all put on the internet. And so all these chemists can just go through, they can find a scientist known for working with chemicals that might have a psychoactive effect. And they just go through all that chemist papers and just start making these. They've got the chemical formulas, and they just start making them, and the market is gets flooded.
That's just absolutely insane. And what drives them to do that? What's the rationale behind switching this up and constantly making new versions of the same thing?
A lot of it has to do with evading the law, like you were saying. In the U.S., there's the Analog Act, which means that not only are any whatever drugs they make illegal, but any drugs that have a similar course of action or a similar chemical structure or similar effects, like those are automatically illegal. And so, but other countries don't have that, like China, where these drugs are made. In China, every time there's a new drug invented, that has to be banned. And that process can take a year or more. And so in the meantime, these chemists can make these new drugs, and they're completely legal in China. And that's what happens. And so you have this big gray market where these Chinese companies, like the ones that I investigated, I went undercover in a couple of Chinese chemical companies making fentanyl and other drugs in China. And they were operating completely legally there and sending it to Western markets.
And can you kind of talk about that a little bit? Like, what was that like for you?
That was pretty scary. I had heard so much about China producing all of these new chemicals, but no one had done any real reporting on it. And so I made like a fake Skype account and started contacting. I just Googled buy fentanyl in China, and there were all these salespeople, these companies. The salespeople had their addresses, email addresses, phone numbers right there, Skype addresses. I contacted them and I said, well, I pretended to be a drug distributor and said if I was in China, would they let me see their labs? And some of them said yes. And so I just, went there and just showed up at these places. A lot of them had their addresses like right there on their homepage. They weren't making any, pretensions at all about trying to hide. And so I got a tour of one of these kind of Breaking Bad style labs outside of Shanghai. I visited the company selling more fentanyl precursors than any other company in Wuhan. This was back before coronavirus, but they're very professional operations. These weren't like underground cartel style operations. They were pretty much legitimate businesses.
Wow. And that's and are they're able to operate above board out there now. I don't know anything about, like, what regulations Chinese government puts on, manufacturing companies, but I'm assuming there has to be some sort of permit or something like that that allows them to operate as a pharmaceutical company. Is that correct, or are they just able to open up shop and do their thing?
Yeah, there are restrictions, but a lot of times they'll have a permit to, make one sort of chemical, but then they'll actually be making another sort of chemical.
Gotcha.
Um, but in terms of like the different fentanyls, fentanyl itself was banned a long time ago, but it wasn't until 2019 that China banned the fentanyl analogs, which is, just slight derivations on fentanyl. And now those are banned, but there are still all sorts of other opioids that can be made legally there. The fentanyl precursors, the ingredients for fentanyl, that's sort of the main cash product now, and it's sold to the Mexican cartels. And so, the laws are tightening in China, but the enforcement, they have very few boots on the ground to actually do the enforcement. So
Now, from your journalism, from your studies and what you've seen, like how did we get to this place where fentanyl's showing up in literally everything? Like what's driving that?
fentanyl is a strange drug in that it's not supply driven. Excuse me, it's not demand driven. It is supply driven. So like when you think about most drugs and most products, it's made because the consumer wants it and the consumer seeks it out, and that's what's driving the product sales. But with fentanyl, it's cut into all these other drugs as a cost saving device, and it's so much cheaper to make. If you want a kilo of heroin, you've got to grow opium poppies out in a big field, and it's gonna, you're gonna have to water it, and you're gonna have to care for it, and then you're gonna have to harvest it, and it's gonna have to be, you know, there's a long process to actually turn the poppy into heroin. But with fentanyl, you can just make it in a lab, and it's a quick process, and it's sold for only like $3,000 a kilo in some cases. And so, it's like it's an incredible bang for your buck from a dealer's perspective. And so there's this huge motivation to use it as a cutting agent. And it started out in like heroin, which would seem to be a natural fit since they're both opioids. But now it's really moved into any drug that can be a pill or a powder. And that's what I tell, especially young people, is that you can't just show up at a party and do a line anymore, and
Yeah.
any pills that you get that aren't from a pharmacy or from your doctor or whatever really could be cut with fentanyl. And you're seeing all these Xanax. They look exactly like a Xanax or a Percocet, but actually they have fentanyl in it.
Yeah, that's and it's I've heard stories of it showing up in cocaine, showing up in meth, which is it. And do you think that what we see is an issue of cross contamination? Is it malicious contamination? Willful?
I don't think it's cross contamination. I've heard that used a lot, and maybe that's a small factor, but no, it's deliberate. But it's not always deliberate by your like local dealer. You know what I mean? these powders and pills are sort of cut up and down the supply chain. And so it's very common, that it might be done in Mexico at the cartel level, first cut. And then when it's brought across the border into the US, these regional distributors might cut it further. And so then when your local dealer gets this product that, he's selling as meth, or he's selling as cocaine or heroin or pills, like he himself might not know what's in it. Like he might be under the impression that he's selling a pure product, and that is the issue. Fentanyl obviously is a important hospital drug, and it's used safely for medical reasons all over the country, all the time. But there are trained anesthesiologists who measure the doses precisely, and that's their job.
Right.
But these dealers have no sense at all how to properly mix fentanyl and cut it into these other drugs. It's just, I talked to a guy who used like a Mr. Coffee grinder to mix up the fentanyl and the heroin. And that just creates these hot spots. So like one dose might be fine, might not do anything, but the next dose from the same batch could kill you.
So yeah, there is no like accurate measurement of what's going into that ratio at all. That's
It's possible to do it, but it takes training. It's difficult.
So like, have you seen places approaching, a response to this epidemic that you think is a good approach? Do you see anything positive? Do you see this stopping anytime soon?
I don't see it stopping anytime soon, but there is a lot, that's sort of heartening about the response. I think we've kind of almost fully we're vastly approaching exiting the war on drugs. I think, we're still incarcerating people for drug crimes, for nonviolent drug crimes, but the numbers are dropping. We're seeing the decriminalization of not just marijuana, but other drugs all, over the US and Canada and different places. It started slowly, but it's picking up speed. And harm reduction is sort of becoming the prevailing philosophy. And I think that's great. I think like we need to not only stop imprisoning nonviolent drug offenders, because that doesn't help them get off drugs. It makes things worse, but we need to reduce the stigma. And I think people are realizing that it's not, just like bad people who use drugs, it's everyone, and everyone is susceptible. And so that's good. We're finally starting to see funding for, like we were talking about, needle exchange programs, and there's like some supervised injection facilities that are starting to pop up. Fentanyl test strips are becoming legalized in states where they were banned before. They're more accessible. Narcan is more available. But I don't think harm reduction is a panacea. And even as harm reduction takes off and is becoming more popular, the number of drug deaths is still rising. And in places like Vancouver, where it's been particularly, they've had some really progressive measures and supervised injection facilities. Like the problem is really bad there. And so, it's not something that offers any easy answers. It's kind of like capitalism gone amok in a way, because it's like the profit incentive for fentanyl is so strong that people are willing to sacrifice human lives for it. So I know that's a little bleak, but
I mean, and that's the scariest part, is that for a long time my understanding of the black market was that, even there, the consumer is to be protected. If you want return customers, you give them what you say you're going to give them, and watching that paradigm shift away from that, you know, into a market where it's like, no, we're just going to say this is one thing and it's actually another, with no care at all about the well-being of your customer. It's just, it's a very strange thing to see happen, right? So from where I'm sitting, and you know, as a libertarian, obviously, you know, I'm always going to go with the less government would be a better outcome. And in particular with this, you know, allowing these drugs to be sold in the open market, you know, not in the back alleyways, where you have a consumer and a retailer making informed decisions and having honest conversations, and where that verbal contract of selling a product can be, you know, you could seek damages in the court of law if there was malicious intent involved. Seems like a better situation. Would you agree with that? Do you think that that would be a step in the right direction?
Yeah, I think so. I think having a regulation about what's in these chemicals that are being sold is particularly important for something like fentanyl. And so, you know, the example a lot of people use is like during Prohibition, um, when people when bootleggers were selling bathtub gin and stuff, they made it all a lot stronger because you could transport it more easily, less, you know, it would take less to make the same profits. And this made the booze more sort of potent and dangerous. And that's kind of similar to what's happening with the drug supply right now. And I went to Spain, you know, during my reporting for Fentanyl Inc. And they don't have a problem with fentanyl there. And they don't have a problem with a lot of these new NPS because they decriminalized all drugs. And so the harm reduction people I talked to there said that people really prefer the traditional drugs. You know, they don't want fentanyl if they can get heroin. You know, they don't want these crazy new cannabinoids, K2 and spice, if they can get, you know, good marijuana. And I think there's something to be said for that. I also wrote about this LSD knockoff called N bombs. It's like the worst name for a drug ever, but these, you know,
Yeah,
you
yeah, it's
know,
terrible.
very poor branding.
Yeah,
LSD is never killed anyone. No one's ever overdosed and died from LSD. And yet, in the wake of its prohibition, there are these new knockoff psychedelics that were legal when they were made, and they were killing people. And so, I think, you know, if we can have a situation where these, you know, psychedelics, say, are regulated and people can buy them from a trusted, you know, from a pharmacist or whatever, be prescribed by a doctor or a counselor or a shaman or something like that. I mean, that would be pretty neat.
yeah, I think so too. I think that would be, you know, I think that there would, not only would that create a better outlook for, you know, kind of like the future that we have found ourselves in, but the, you know, applicable purposes for some of these substances would, you know, kind of make its way out into the mainstream, you know, as somebody who, you know, I'm in the recovery community. So like, I'm never going to use these substances again, at least not today, you know? And so, but from where I'm sitting, like I can see some of the value in something like, you know, ayahuasca and LSD, microdosing, shrooms, and all of that. But, you know, right now, what you have is some blurry information on some of it, right? And even more blurry information whenever you're buying from somebody who you already know that they're not operating above the table, right? Like they're in the black market. It is what it is, you know? Um, so when it comes to Spain, I want to touch on that one more time, just a little bit further. Like, how long have they been decriminalized out there? Do you know?
It's been a while now, at least like 6, 7, or 8 years, and Portugal too. And Portugal got a lot of press because when they had a big heroin problem, and once they decriminalized it, they found that not only did the problems associated with heroin use, needles in parks, HIV and other sexually transmitted diseases, or blood transmitted diseases. Those rates went down, but the actual use of heroin, and particularly problematic use of heroin, didn't go up. It actually went down. And so that was pretty amazing. And Spain has seen a lot of those same great results as well.
So and the reason I asked, like, the timeline, like, one of the things that was shocking to me is like finding out that, how long fentanyl's been around and all of that. I was curious, like, has fentanyl made its way into these countries? Like, does Spain, does Portugal have a presence of it? And if it is there, do people know that it's there, or is it just kind of those guys are pushed out?
What's crazy is that it's only really the U.S. and Canada, and also the small northern European country of Estonia, that have fentanyl problems. And so a lot of that is due to the overprescription of the pills like OxyContin, and that kind of started this domino effect. And that really only happened in the US and Canada. But that said, we are starting to see fentanyl creep up in places like England and Australia a little bit. And my, again, pessimistic prediction is that it's only a matter of time before we do see fentanyl in these other European countries and other places around the world, because the profit motive is just too high.
Yeah, that's is and I look, Ben, you're a saint for hanging with me through my ADD. Like, man, I jump around on top. This is just my style. My audience is they're used to it by now. So, but I want to jump to that. The prescription pill thing. Like, I remember distinctly when I was little, my dad was prescribed OxyContin for migraines, and his doctor told him, "Oh, hey, like, this is not, it's not habit forming. You're going to be fine." And that wasn't the case, and prescribing something like OxyContin for, a headache is insane. I
Yeah,
mean,
it is insane.
it's crazy, but, do
Yeah, I
you,
have. Sorry to interrupt. I'm speaking with this the provider of treatment, opioid treatment options in St. Louis. His name is Percy Menzies, and his theory is that, like, we have these really strong, prescription pills that we're using too much, like you're saying, and that we have these opioid treatments like methadone, for example, that's still super potent. But that should be used as a pain reliever, for like acute pain. And we should just, kind of ratchet down the whole thing. And I heard someone talk about, like, in Japan, that she was there with her father in Japan, and he got this terrible, like, open wound. He got cut, like, all across his, like, abdomen. And in the hospital, they just gave him a couple of Advil, and there's, like, no culture of opioid use at all in Japan. And on the one hand, it sounds, draconian, but on the other hand, I think we just completely have overdone it here.
yeah, we, the culture and running away from pain is different. And the way we look at these pills as if they are some sort of treatment that will eventually cure the pain, when in reality it's just, numbing it. Like, it's not solving the underlying issue. I know, like, out here, pain management clinics were huge for a long time, and there was no treatment going on. It's just a constant, revolving, prescription plan was what
Yeah,
that was.
meanwhile, you're developing an addiction. And yeah, I heard something like, if you're on these strong narcotic pills for more than 6 weeks, you're no longer even treating the pain. You're just sort of maintaining an addiction.
Yeah, big time. In the rooms and, in meetings, I can't tell you how many times, especially post, the hammer being brought down and doctors being really reined in on what they could prescribe. I would see, very well-to-do people sitting in a meeting, wringing their hands, just not sure how they wound up in a 12-step meeting because of their, prescription that they were taking. Like, they did not know what they were getting into
Yeah.
at all.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, the only caveat I would add is that just taking these people's pills away, though, is not the answer either. You
No.
know, and that's been kind of an overcorrection in this country. That you know, once people are addicted, I mean, if you take away their pills, then they're going to turn to street heroin, street fentanyl, and so you know, and then I mean, maybe ironically, is that people with opioid addictions, you know, long-term heroin problems, the best solution is often like, you know, government heroin and then you know, so we got to, you know, change how we think about a lot of this.
Yeah, there is a healthy dose of grim irony in that, especially when the pills get taken away and they're pushed into a marketplace of, fentanyl on the rise. Um, One of the things that we saw too, that I know of personally, is, when COVID hit, a lot of meetings shut down. This obviously had an adverse effect on many people, for better or for worse. Um, some folks got really used to going to those meetings in person, and that's where they thrived. And so they relapsed into a brand new black market that they weren't experienced with before. And lo and behold, there was fentanyl waiting. It's a scary, scary time to be in that world. Um, you touched on it on the methadone, and I wanted to get your opinion on it. Like, what do you think about things like Suboxone and methadone?
I have very mixed feelings, you know, because a lot of people report that methadone can be even more addictive than heroin, and you know, obviously, like, one of the biggest problems with heroin and fentanyl and street drugs is just like to obtain it. You know, how are you going to get the money? You know, and it turns a lot of people into crime and prostitution and things like that, and you know, dirty needles and all the problems with that. And so methadone and Suboxone are obviously an improvement over that, but it's also kind of like palliative care almost in a lot of cases. It's like it's almost like we're not even going to try to like get you drug free. We're just going to sort of put you on this, you know, in some cases for the rest of your life. And there's another treatment drug that I don't think gets enough attention, which is called Naltrexone, and it's known through the Vivitrol shot. And naltrexone is actually pretty much the same chemical as Narcan, naloxone. It's just that Narcan is administered after an overdose, whereas naltrexone is administered prophylactically, meaning before you take it, before to block an opioid. And so basically, naltrexone is an opioid antagonist. So if you know take this shot of naltrexone, the brand is Vivitrol, it basically gives you a full month where you can take heroin, you can take fentanyl, and it won't even affect you at all. It won't latch on to the receptors. And so, you know, not everyone can take naltrexone. Like, you have to be completely detoxed. You can't have anything in your system. So for a lot of people, it's hard to get completely detoxed at all. But for like people coming out of prison who have previous opioid addictions, it's particularly useful. And I've worked with a guy who's had a really successful run with it. And you know, like if you're for pilots, you know, pilots and doctors, for example, aren't allowed to operate if they're on methadone or Suboxone, but they are if they're on naltrexone, and same with pilots and things like that. And it's a way to get, you know, drugs totally out of your system.
That's yeah, and that's kind of been my summation. So like I work in the recovery field, and seeing kind of the response to some of the Suboxone, and you're absolutely right on the methadone. Like that, kicking methadone is a nightmare and a half, right? Uh, just as bad, if not worse, than the actual heroin in and of itself. And so, yeah. Well, Ben, you have done a lot of solid work on this. You've throughout your book and just kind of what you brought into light, have illuminated some things on this. Um, before we get into like your current project, just what's one thing that you want people to really get out of your work, Fentanyl Inc?
Just that the education is the most important thing, and if you're going to use drugs, you have to test your drugs. I mean, 100%. Like if there's some, like marijuana buds and you can smell them and they look normal, you're probably fine. But for any powder, any pills, I recommend the Bunk Police. They sell these affordable testing kits. But yeah, just kind of like people who work in harm reduction, like yourself. I think just spreading the word about fentanyl is so important, because I think a lot of kids, especially, just don't have any idea, and that's kind of what I would like the main takeaway to be.
Right on. So moving out of that and into your current work, tell us about your most recent book.
My new book is called Little Brother: Love, Tragedy, and My Search for the Truth. It's a kind of true crime memoir about my relationship with my little brother in the Big Brothers Big Sisters program. So his name was Jarrell Cleveland, and he was my mentee for 11 years before he was murdered in 2016 near his home in Ferguson, Missouri, outside of St. Louis, where I live. And there was no one was arrested. The case went cold. And I initially thought his killing must have just been random, but eventually it started to dawn on me that Jarrell probably knew his killer. And so I applied sort of my full investigative journalist skill set to figuring out who killed him and kind of getting to the bottom of the story. So that's what the book is about.
Wow, that's incredibly interesting, man. I don't want you to give anything too much away from that, but how did you get involved in that program? We'll start there.
Big Brothers Big Sisters, yeah, it's a great program. I just wanted to do something where I could really give back, and I was really needed. And they really need, especially male volunteers all over the country at these programs. And even though my mentee died, I still really strongly advocate for the program.
Yeah, that's I've known people who got into it and have never heard a single bad thing about it. We lift each other up, right? Like that's how society is supposed to operate and function. Do you still talk to this mentee's parents or family to any extent?
Yeah, I mean, we just had the book launch for little brother, my new book, and Jarrell's dad introduced me, and that was kind of the silver lining for this whole process, was getting to know his family better, and they really wanted answers. They wanted to know who killed their son and why, and so just being able to it took me like 3 years to really bear down and figure this out, but to be able to do that for them was very meaningful.
That's huge, man. Yeah, I mean, just not only for them to have an advocate, but to have an advocate like yourself in their corner. That's a huge deal, man.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Ben, thank you so much for taking the time to come on. Where can people find you and keep up with kind of what you do?
You can just Google Ben Westhoff and you'll have my website, and it's got, in any like book retailers will have Fentanyl Inc. and my new book, Little Brother. And I've also got a newsletter called Drugs and Hip Hop that people can sign up for.
I did not know about that. I will sign up for that today. That's right up my alley. All right. Well, Ben, thanks a lot for taking some time on a Saturday morning to hang out with me and talk about this. I appreciate you, sir.
Well, thank you for having me. It was great talking to you, Drew.
Right on, man. Have a good one.
All right.
All right, there you go. Ben, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you guys for tuning in and listening to that. Please go out and get that book, Fentanyl Inc. I picked up my copy on Amazon, so it's available there. Obviously, Barnes & Noble or wherever you buy books will have a copy of it. But it's a phenomenal book, a great deep dive into kind of the current state of things, man. Ben really didn't pull any punches with this one. He got to the bottom of it, and a lot of great information in there. And so with that out of the way, kind of wanted to make an announcement. So I am currently taking donations. This has been something that has been on my mind for quite a while. I am absolutely going to be starting a needle exchange out here in Oklahoma City. We're going to call it Out of Harm's Way, OKC. And I don't know, guys. I've prayed about this a lot. I feel really called to do it. And currently, I think, we're at $150 raised. Need realistically about $500 to get this thing going. So if you're listening to this and that's something that you could help out with, I don't care if it's $5, $10, whatever, please reach out to me either on Twitter, at LibertyDrew84 or at, Clean Podcast. Find me, and let me know. Every little bit is going to go to help out. We're not seeking grant money, not seeking to use taxpayer dollars for this. We can 100% fund this through the community. And so just some stats for you, like, the main thing is that people who have access to clean equipment, they are 5 times more likely to seek and find recovery than those who don't. Here in Oklahoma, we do not have the ability to purchase clean needles from a pharmacy without a prescription. I have literally watched addicts mutilate their arms with livestock needles from Tractor Supply. Also, sharing needles is a huge thing out here. We have one of the highest mortality rates in the country for things like hepatitis C and the like. So the whole idea about it is that dead addicts can't recover, right? So this is one of those things that we're going to give people a chance to stick around long enough that hopefully recovery can take hold. It's grimy, it's dirty, it's not real pretty, but the facts are the facts, right? And the fact of the matter is that we need to keep these folks alive. And so if you can help with that, it would be greatly, greatly appreciated. But anyway, thank you guys so much for sticking with me, for tuning in. And I have some wonderful, wonderful interviews lined up in the next month. And I love y'all very much. And song of the day, can't forget that. So to celebrate Pride Month kicking off, you already know, it's Screeching Weasel, I Want to Be a Homosexual. This is just a great song, man. I hope you guys like it. So we will see y'all later.